All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at the absolute tactical genius and just sheer human endurance behind literally one of the greatest military upsets in all of history. The Battle of Yarmouk wasn't just some standard clash of armies, you know? It's a complete masterclass in strategy, resilience, and battlefield psychology that completely reshaped the geopolitical map of the world. 200,000. I really want you to let that number sink in for a second. That staggering figure represents the immense, sprawling force of the Byzantine Roman Empire sent down to crush the Muslim presence in the Levant. Try to actually picture that. A massive, seemingly endless sea of armored infantry, archers, and heavy cavalry. This was the full might of an ancient, established superpower, absolutely determined to protect its territory. So, the million-dollar question we're exploring today is, how exactly did a vastly outnumbered Muslim army of only 40,000 men manage to completely crush a giant force 5 times its size? Like, how does that even happen? What kind of tactical maneuvering allows a smaller force to not just survive, but absolutely dismantle an imperial army?
Let's get into part 1, the impossible odds.
When you look at the command structure here, the immense pressure facing them becomes crystal clear. You've got the Roman commander Mahan leading a massive force of 200,000 men. On the flip side, the Muslim commander, Khalid bin al-Walid, had to somehow manage a defense with a mere 40,000 troops. I mean, talk about a true test of endurance, right?
Moving over to the timeline, you can really see how this incredible narrative builds across 3 absolutely pivotal days. We're going to track a progression that takes us from the literal brink of total collapse on day 4 to a critical psychological turning point on day 5, and finally culminating in an absolute masterstroke of military victory on day 6.
Which brings us to part 2, the Day of Lost Eyes. Okay, so on day 4, the Romans decide they're going to break the Muslim lines from a distance. They unleash thousands upon thousands of arrows. Historical accounts actually say the sky turned completely black, raining arrows down like a terrible hailstorm. It was so intense, so overwhelming, that many Muslim fighters were literally blinded, including the prominent leader Abu Sufyan, who lost an eye. The sheer volume of this barrage is exactly why history remembers this devastating phase as the Day of Lost Eyes. Under this horrific barrage, the Muslim lines actually begin to buckle. Men start retreating. It looks like it's all over. But then, unbelievable, desperate individual heroics completely save the day. You have women in the camp, figures like Khawla bint al-Azwar and Hakim, literally grabbing tent poles and swords, striking the retreating men and shaming them into turning around and standing their ground. And right at that same moment, a warrior named Ikrimah calls out, asking for men who will pledge to fight to the very death. 400 soldiers step forward without hesitation, charging straight into the Roman center just to absorb the shock of the advance. And remarkably, they held the line. But man, the cost was just devastating. Practically all 400 of those men were either deeply wounded or killed. As night finally fell, the great warrior Ikrimah and his son, who were both fatally wounded while repelling that fierce Roman advance, took their last breaths, dying honorably right there in the arms of Khalid bin al-Walid. They had saved the army, but, just barely. Now we move into part 3, Khalid's decisive counterattack. So, after surviving quite literally the worst the Romans could throw at them, the tide subtly begins to turn on day 5. The sheer bone-deep exhaustion on both sides leads to this fascinating contrast in mindset. The Roman commander, Mahan, actually sends an emissary offering a truce. Now, the official commander of the Muslim army, Abu Ubaidah, looks at his battered, bleeding men, and understandably, he initially wants to accept it. But Khalid bin al-Walid, he accurately reads the underlying reality of the situation. He points out that if a massive, overwhelming army of 200,000 is asking for a pause, well, their morale must be completely broken. So he flat out refuses the truce and instead immediately begins prepping for a decisive strike. Day 6 kicks off with just a massive morale boost. A fierce Roman commander named Gregory steps forward, challenging the Muslim leadership to a one-on-one duel. Abu Ubaidah steps right out to meet him. And despite Gregory's totally fearsome reputation, Abu Ubaidah single-handedly defeats him right there in front of both armies. Seeing their commander strike down a top Roman champion, that sends an absolute shockwave of energy through the Muslim ranks. With morale absolutely peaking, Khalid launches his master plan. And it's brilliant. Instead of keeping his cavalry spread thin across all the different battalions for defense, he does something radically counterintuitive. Step 1. He pulls all of his horses together to create one massive, highly mobile strike force of 8,000 cavalry. Step 2, he uses this combined superforce to repeatedly smash into the heavily armored, but much slower, Roman cavalry, eventually driving them completely off the battlefield. And step 3, this brilliant maneuver leaves the entire Roman infantry totally stranded and exposed.
This perfectly sets up part 4, closing the Wadi trap. With their cavalry fleeing and the Muslim forces pressing in hard from both the front and the sides, the stranded Roman infantry is forced into what looks like an orderly but is ultimately a doomed retreat westward. The Romans are marching toward what they think is their secure escape route, a narrow river crossing over a steep ravine known as the Wadi al-Rukad. They're thinking, if they can just cross this bridge, they can reorganize safely. But they are entirely unaware that Khalid has anticipated this exact movement. He's already set a deadly trap. Waiting for them at this incredibly narrow choke point is a devastating ambush. Under the cover of night, Khalid had already sent a fiercely determined, bare-chested warrior named Durar bin al-Azwar, along with just 500 fighters, to capture the crossing. Because the path is so incredibly narrow, the Romans' massive numbers just don't matter anymore. Only a few can actually fight at a time. So Durar and his 500 men completely block the only possible exit. Now the Romans are completely boxed in, trapped between Durar's men at the bridge and Khalad's advancing army pushing hard from behind. And here is where a very specific Roman military tactic turns into an absolute nightmare. They utilize this thing called the army of chains, literally linking groups of soldiers together with actual chains to prevent anyone from breaking formation and running away. Now, chaining yourselves together might sound brave, maybe even practical on an open field, but when you are pinned against the edge of a steep ravine, it is disastrous. As the panic and pressure mount, one man slips and falls, and because they're linked, he drags 10 other men with him right over the steep cliffs into the ravine below. The entire Roman army basically just collapses in on itself. And finally, part 5, farewell to Syria. The final casualty difference here is just staggering. To put it in perspective, the battle resulted in at least 70,000 Roman losses, compared to roughly 4,000 Muslim losses. Let that sink in. It is the ultimate proof that superior tactics, psychological warfare, and just unyielding resolve can utterly dismantle a force 5 times larger. The victory is complete. Khalid relentlessly pursues the fleeing Roman commander Mahan, defeating his remaining forces and taking Damascus. And interestingly, because of the previous fair dealings the Muslims had with the locals, the citizens of Damascus actually willingly opened their gates to the Muslims without a fight. This effectively cemented a completely new era in the region. The news quickly travels north to Antioch, eventually reaching the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius. Realizing that his massive, invincible army has been completely annihilated and the region is permanently lost, he abandons his prized territory. He leaves behind this haunting quote, "Farewell, Syria. Farewell, a meeting without return." It's an incredible testament to the battle we've just analyzed. And, it leaves us with a pretty provocative thought. If an untouchable superpower like the Byzantine Empire could be toppled in just 6 days of tactical maneuvering, what other seemingly permanent institutions in our world today might just be one strategic masterstroke away from falling?